In the small village of Briarwood, nestled deep within the blackthorn forest, there lived a man named Lucas, known to everyone for his gentle nature. He was a carpenter, crafting beautiful furniture and intricate carvings for his neighbors. What they didn't know, however, was that Lucas harbored a dark secret. He was a werewolf. Unlike the stories told in whispers around the fire, Lucas was no savage beast. He had learned to control the transformations, keeping them contained to the deep of the woods on nights when the moon was full. For years, he lived in peace, ensuring no harm came to the villagers or the wildlife. He even began to see the wolf as a part of himself, something he could coexist with. But one night, something went wrong. The full moon hung heavy in the sky, larger and brighter than ever before. A strange chill had settled over the village, and Lucas felt a pull unlike anything he'd experienced before. He wandered into the forest as usual, expecting the familiar change to come, but this time it felt different, darker, more primal. As he shifted, the wolf inside him roared, a feral snarl that echoed through the trees. Lucas tried to regain control, to calm the beast, but it was no longer listening. His senses sharpened, and something else stirred within him, a hunger, fierce and insatiable. He fought to suppress it, clawing his way back to his human thoughts, but the wolf was stronger now, more aggressive, driven by an ancient force he had never encountered before. When Lucas awoke the next morning, he found himself drenched in sweat and surrounded by destruction. Trees were uprooted, their trunks torn apart, and the earth was scarred with deep claw marks. He stumbled back toward the village, panic seizing his chest. Had he hurt someone? Had the beast broken free of his control at last? To his relief, the village appeared untouched. No signs of an attack, but the air was thick with unease, and people whispered about strange noises heard during the night, screeches and howls that didn't sound like anything they had ever heard from the woods before. Lucas swore to himself that it wouldn't happen again, that he'd find a way to regain control. But as the next full moon approached, he felt the same dark presence creeping into his mind. It was as though something or someone had awakened the primal force within him. It wasn't just the wolf anymore, something ancient had latched onto his curse, drawing power from it, growing stronger. And then the disappearances began. First, it was the animals. Cattle, goats, and chickens were found slaughtered, their bodies torn apart. Then it was the people. A young woman named Eliza went missing one night, vanishing without a trace. Search parties scoured the forest, but no one could find her. Fear gripped the village, and whispers of a cursed beast roamed the streets. Lucas, tortured by guilt, knew it had to be him, though he had no memory of attacking anyone. He retreated deeper into the woods, hoping to distance himself from the village, but the dark force followed him, haunting his every step. He began to hear whispers, faint at first, but growing louder with each passing day. "Embrace it, Lucas. Let the wolf consume you." The voice was cold, almost hypnotic. It came from the shadows, from the trees, from his own mind. It urged him to give in, to surrender to the beast fully. He tried to resist, but each night, the pull grew stronger. On the night of the next full moon, Lucas prepared himself for what he feared would be his final battle with the beast. He locked himself in a remote cabin far from the village, chaining himself to the walls. But as the moon rose, so did the darkness within him. The chains rattled as he transformed, and for a brief moment, he thought he might be able to contain it. But then, from the corner of the cabin, a shadow moved. It slithered across the floor, taking shape, a tall, hooded figure, its face obscured by darkness. The whispers grew louder, and the figure spoke in a voice like cracking ice. "You cannot fight me, Lucas. I am bound to you now." The wolf inside him howled, its eyes glowing with a sickly, unnatural light. Lucas felt his control slipping away as the figure approached him, its cold hand reaching out to touch his chest. A surge of energy shot through him, and the wolf roared, its hunger now overwhelming. The figure's face emerged from the hood, revealing eyes as black as midnight and a twisted smile. It leaned closer and whispered in Lucas's ear, "You belong to me now. Together, we will hunt." The last thing Lucas saw before his vision went black was the figure disappearing into the shadows, leaving him alone in the cabin. But he wasn't alone, not anymore. When the villagers found the cabin the next morning, It was empty. The chains were broken, and deep claw marks scarred the walls. Lucas was gone, but something far worse had taken his place. Now, the villagers speak of a new horror in the woods, a creature that hunts not out of instinct, but with a terrifying intelligence. It watches them, always just out of sight, waiting for the next full moon to rise. And somewhere, deep within the creature, Lucas fights to regain control. But the dark force that has claimed him is growing stronger with each passing night. The villagers pray that it will never come back. But the moon is rising again, and they all sense that something is coming for them. Something worse than the Wolf. The end is not near. This is only the beginning. The village of Briarwood had changed. Fear hung over the streets like a thick fog, and the once bustling square was now eerily silent after dark. Doors were barred, windows shut tight, and no one dared speak of Lucas, the kind carpenter who had vanished into the woods. But rumors began to circulate. Strange figures were seen lurking near the forest's edge, and some swore they had heard voices calling to them in the night. The full moon was approaching again, and the village was on edge. The elders held secret meetings, desperate to find a way to protect their people. Some spoke of calling in hunters, mercenaries skilled in tracking and slaying beasts. Others whispered of ancient rituals, magic that could seal away the evil lurking in the woods. But nothing was certain. The only thing they knew for sure was that the danger was growing. In the midst of this rising terror, a stranger arrived in Briarwood. He appeared one evening at the edge of the forest, cloaked in dark, weathered clothing, with a long hood that shadowed his face. His presence was commanding, but unsettling. The villagers eyed him warily, but he offered no harm, just a warning. "The thing in the woods," the stranger said, his voice a deep rumble. "It is not what you think. It is not just a beast." The elders gathered around him, asking who he was and how he knew of their plight. The stranger revealed little about himself, only that he had been tracking the darkness for a long time. He had encountered it before many times, in different forms. It was an ancient entity, older than the forest itself, and it had latched onto Lucas the moment he lost control of the Wolf. It was feeding on him now, twisting him into something more dangerous than a mere werewolf. The villagers listened in silence as the stranger explained. This darkness, this force, was a remnant of something ancient and powerful, something that had been buried beneath the earth long ago. It craved power, and it used creatures like Lucas as vessels, bending them to its will. "We have to help him," said one of the villagers. "Lucas was a good man, kind and gentle. We can't leave him like this." The stranger's face darkened. "If you try to help him now, you risk unleashing something far worse than a simple werewolf. The thing inside him is growing stronger with each moon, and soon, Lucas will be gone completely. But there must be a way to free him," another villager said. "There must be something we can do." The stranger hesitated, then reached into his cloak and pulled out an old, leather-bound book. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with strange symbols and ancient writings. He flipped through it until he found a page marked with a black ribbon. "There is a ritual," he said quietly, "a dangerous one. It could sever the bond between Lucas and the dark force, but it requires a great sacrifice. And even then, there are no guarantees." "What kind of sacrifice?" asked the village elder. The stranger's eyes flickered with something unreadable, and he spoke slowly. "The life of one bound to the Wolf." A heavy silence fell over the group. No one spoke, but they all understood what the stranger meant. They would have to offer the life of another werewolf if one even existed. "Lucas is the only werewolf we know," one of the elders whispered. The stranger's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Are you so sure?" Confusion spread through the room, but the stranger said no more. Instead, he gathered his belongings and prepared to leave, telling the villagers that the choice was theirs. If they wanted to attempt the ritual, they would need to find another werewolf before the next full moon. If not, the darkness would continue to consume Lucas until there was nothing left of the man they once knew. As the stranger turned to leave, the village elder called out to him, "Wait, how do we find this other werewolf?" The stranger paused at the door, his eyes gleaming beneath the hood. "You already know where to look," he said cryptically. "The Wolf has always been closer than you think." With that, he vanished into the night, leaving the villagers with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain: the time was running out. Meanwhile, deep within the blackthorn forest, Lucas wandered in the shadows, his mind fractured between the man and the beast. The dark force inside him whispered constantly now, its voice like a snake winding through his thoughts, urging him to give in completely. "You belong to me, Lucas. There is no escape." But somewhere deep within him, a flicker of the man remained. He remembered the villagers, Eliza, the girl who had disappeared, the children who used to watch him carve wooden animals, the laughter and the warmth of the village. He wanted to protect them. He wanted to be free of the darkness, but he didn't know how. As he wandered through the forest, Lucas heard something: footsteps, soft and deliberate. He turned, his senses heightened, and saw a figure approaching him through the trees. It was Eliza. She was pale, her eyes hollow, and her movements slow and deliberate. Lucas felt a cold dread wash over him as she drew nearer. She wasn't the same girl who had vanished weeks ago. Something had changed her, twisted her just as the darkness was twisting him. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's not just you. It's in all of us." Before Lucas could respond, she reached out and touched his arm. A surge of cold energy shot through him, and he staggered back, his vision blurring. The darkness inside him roared, but Eliza's touch seemed to calm it, if only for a moment. "Find them," she said, her voice echoing in his mind. "Find the others, before it's too late." And then she was gone, fading into the mist of the forest, leaving Lucas alone with the weight of her words. Find the others. The full moon was only days away, and Lucas knew that whatever was happening, it wasn't just about him anymore. There were others out there, others like him caught in the web of the ancient darkness. And if he couldn't find them in time, the darkness would consume them all. But as Lucas turned to leave the forest, a new thought crept into his mind, one that chilled him to the core. What if the other werewolves were already in the village? And what if the darkness had already begun to spread? The moon was rising, and the true hunt was only just beginning. The full moon hung heavy in the sky, casting a silver glow over the village of Briarwood. The wind rustled through the trees, and the forest seemed to whisper ancient secrets, as if it knew what was coming. In the heart of the blackthorn forest, Lucas stood at the edge of a clearing, his heart pounding in his chest. He had spent days searching for the others, following the clues Eliza had given him, and now he was here ready to face the darkness once and for all. Around him, figures emerged from the shadows. Eliza was among them, her once pale face now glowing with life. She was not alone. Others stepped forward, villagers he had known, people who had vanished over the years. They were werewolves like him, their curse hidden for generations, only awakened by the ancient force that had latched onto him. "Lucas," Eliza said softly, her voice steady. "We are all connected. The darkness binds us, but it also gives us strength. We can fight this together." Lucas looked at her, his eyes filled with doubt. The dark force within him was still there, whispering, urging him to give in. But the others, they seemed stronger, united in a way he hadn't expected. Perhaps they had learned something he hadn't. How? Lucas asked. How do we fight something that's been inside us for so long? Eliza stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. It's not just the darkness that binds us. We share the same blood, the same strength. If we stand together, we can break its hold. The others nodded in agreement, their eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. Lucas felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of connection he hadn't felt in years. For so long, he had seen the Wolf as a curse, something to be controlled and hidden. But now, standing among the others, he realized that the Wolf was part of who he was, part of all of them. Together, they could be more than the darkness. The stranger's words echoed in Lucas's mind. Asterisk, the Wolf has always been closer than you think. Asterisk, the truth had been there all along. The other werewolves had been living among the villagers for generations, hiding their nature out of fear. But now, they could no longer hide. The darkness had forced them to confront what they truly were. Lucas took a deep breath and nodded. Let's end this. The ritual began at midnight, beneath the full moon. The clearing was surrounded by towering trees, their branches forming a natural barrier against the outside world. Eliza stood at the center, holding the old leather-bound book the stranger had left behind. The others formed a circle around her, their eyes fixed on Lucas, who stood at the center, his heart racing. As Eliza began to chant the ancient words, the wind picked up, swirling around them like a living thing. The ground beneath them trembled, and the air grew heavy with the scent of earth and pine. Lucas felt the darkness inside him stir, growing restless as the ritual continued. But he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He looked around at the others, his kin, and felt their strength flowing into him. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts. They were a pack, bound not by the darkness, but by their shared will to overcome it. Eliza's voice grew louder, and the air crackled with energy. The darkness inside Lucas roared, fighting to break free, but he held it back, focusing on the connection he felt with the others. Their energy flowed into him, steady and strong, grounding him in the present. Then, with a final word, Eliza finished the ritual. A blinding light exploded from the center of the clearing, washing over them like a wave. The darkness within Lucas screamed in protest, writhing as it was torn from him, but it was no match for the combined strength of the pack. In that moment, Lucas felt the darkness break away. It was like a weight lifting from his soul, leaving him lighter, freer than he had ever been. The connection to the ancient force was severed, and the whispers in his mind fell silent at last. He collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, but when he looked up, he saw the others standing tall, their eyes clear and bright. The darkness had been banished from them as well. They were free. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lucas felt whole. In the days that followed, the village of Briarwood slowly began to heal. The disappearances stopped, and the strange sightings at the edge of the forest faded into memory. The villagers never learned the full truth of what had happened, but they knew that something had changed. Lucas returned to his life as a carpenter, but he was no longer alone. The other werewolves, once scattered and hidden, began to meet in secret, forming a quiet bond that would protect them from the shadows that had once threatened their lives. They lived among the villagers, but now, they did so without fear. Eliza often visited Lucas in his workshop, and together, they would speak of the night they had faced the darkness. It had been a battle not just of strength, but of will, of their determination to be more than what the darkness wanted them to be. And though the ancient force had been banished, Lucas knew that it was still out there, somewhere, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. But this time, they would be ready. They were stronger now, united not by the curse, but by their choice to rise above it. As the seasons passed, the village slowly returned to its old ways. The fear of the full moon faded, and the villagers went back to their lives. But Lucas and the others would never forget what had happened, how close they had come to losing themselves, and how they had found strength in each other when it mattered most. And so, under the light of a peaceful moon, Lucas found peace at last, knowing that the darkness had been driven away, not by magic or violence, but by the bonds they had forged together. The kind werewolf had returned, and this time he was free.